Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira, and this is the Roundtable, episode number 27. I am joined by Mark Sleboda and Yves Smith. Mark Sleboda. Mark, how's it going? Good to see you, my friend.
I'm alive, Gonzalo. I see you are too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hanging in there. Mark is a professor at Moscow State University. Am I right? Yeah, I always forget. Moscow State, right?
Yeah.
And he runs a YouTube channel. The link is in the description below. And he's started to get real active on it. So go check it out and subscribe to it. I think you'll really enjoy it. And I also have my good friend Yves Smith from Naked Capitalism. Yves, how's it going?
Oh, it's going just fine, considering
that we're suffering a financial Armageddon.
Oh, yes. Considering that I'm in a country with a completely mad leadership.
Yes. Yves Smith runs the Naked Capitalism blog site. The link is in the description below. I've known her for over a decade, since a little after the 2008 financial crisis. Right. And it's a pleasure having both of you on. And so, Mark, just before the show, you told me very, very provocatively that the Russian military has told everybody to get out of Kharkov. Please explain.
I'm a little surprised that you haven't heard this, but so because Russia really did a number on the electricity up there, the radio broadcasting, the strong signals from the regime systems were down. And so from what I've heard, the Russian radio signals were getting from the Russian military were getting through very strong. And people were all out in their cars listening to the Russian military broadcasting, warning everyone in Kharkov to, if you value your family and whatnot, to get out of Dodge. Now, I don't know if that was disinformation or a presaging of some major offensive, but everyone is noting that Russia does have a very large military force with an armored fist assembled in Belgorod, right across the border there, and has not been doing anything with them for quite some time now. And there's been a lot of speculation. And likewise, Russia has started moving again significant numbers of troops into Belarus.
And when did you hear this, by the way, about the Kharkov situation?
I believe yesterday.
Okay, I'm gonna have to find out what's what. Because I am not aware of this, but I haven't been keeping my ear that close to the ground because I've been writing a book. So that's what eats up my time.
Yeah.
And
like I said, I don't know whether it's a psyop and misdirection or whether there's some reality to it, but let us know.
He was giving us reports on the missiles before. So.
Oh, look, whoa, there it went by, just like
the family members that I have in Kharkov got out of there about 6 weeks ago. So
my own family is long gone from here. So they're perfectly safe and fine, far away. But okay, that's good to know. It's good. Thanks for the heads up. Anyway, so what's been happening in the Ukraine and the war front is that the Russians, 2 days ago, they started this huge missile onslaught. It appeared superficially to be a response to the Kerch bombing. And by the way, a lot of information has come out on the Kerch bombing. I mean, you've been following that, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. And the bridge is completely repaired. I mean, they spent one day in the Kiev regime celebrating, and the NATO cheerleaders just going berserk, saying, "Oh, we destroyed the bridge," and the train was operating within 12 hours. And and I saw cranes fixing the lane that had been broken down.
There's still one auto lane out. That will still take another 6 weeks, I believe, at least, to repair. But there is one lane of auto traffic that's already been divided so that it's both ways. One path, and the train traffic, which of course is the more important for logistical reasons, which is supposedly the rationale for taking it out, although I believe it's far more symbolic than anything else, the way the regime's ghouls were celebrating it with stamps and selfies and everything immediately.
Oh, the
I
stamp
think
all
it was
ready to go was shocking. Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's far more symbolic.
Also, there's a lot of rumors saying that that what do you call it? This was really planned by the British, by MI6.
Okay, so the British presented different plans for taking out the bridge. Now, none of those were what this plan was.
Okay, so
But
it doesn't mean anything. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but the real, I think they've narrowed down, the path that these explosives, they were covered over with metal films, which
Yeah.
both helped protect them from being scanned, and they're a type that would increase the intensity of the blast. They went from Ukraine to Bulgaria, and then from Bulgaria to Armenia, I believe, and then to to Georgia and then Armenia. Georgia and then Armenia. And then into Russia. And the dupe that they got eventually to carry it from the Kerch region into across the bridge, or at least the beginning of it. He had no idea what he was carrying. He was made into an unwilling suicide bomber. He's got 3 kids, or 3 kids had a father anyway.
And he was definitely a dupe.
Yeah, he was definitely a dupe. But the real question is, this was clever because the timing, it was timed to coincide with the adjacent rail lines to have heavy fuel canisters crossing at the same time, which, the explosion of the truck bombing blew up the canisters and made a much more significant damage. I mean, obviously it was intended to be more significant even than it was, but events, didn't transpire that way. But it was rather clever, and the timing would have been rather hard, particularly because the driver obviously knew nothing about it. I presume that he was requested to to text or whatever.
Yeah, I understand that we got a WhatsApp message, and apparently it's very common for gypsy drivers to just pick up a load and just go.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it seems impossible that they had a spotter on the bridge. So there's a very high likelihood that this was all timed with satellites.
Okay, or perhaps a car. It doesn't matter. I mean, ultimately, they achieved what they wanted to achieve. And by the way, for those listening who might not know, the kind of very circuitous route that they took, the truck traffic was very common to be going in these various directions. So it was sort of like the truck got lost in the bunch kind of thing. No, and they were very clever about it, but it was ultimately superficial. It was just a PR thing, and it meant nothing with the subsequent attack. My thinking is that the missile attack on the next day, that kind of missile attack takes time to plan.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean it doesn't mean a lot of times governments, right, particularly when they're talking military measures, they have contingency plans in the waiting, that a certain step in the escalation spiral, they have a number of options to pull out that have a high degree of pre-planning and pre-staging. So I don't necessarily believe that this was going to happen, this week, whether or not the Crimean Bridge was hit, despite the new Russian general, the General Armageddon, sort of Vulcan taking over the overall operation of the still ridiculously named special military operation. But obviously the parameters of that have changed. But I think that after that was done, it was just like, okay, option B is a go.
You're probably right. Something like that. But Dima at the Military Summary Channel had a very good analysis of it last night, which I recommend you guys listening check it out.
I already listened to it.
Where he basically had a map of the electrical system in Ukraine, and he was fairly convinced that the whole idea was to isolate eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine insofar as electricity, so that no trains could run.
Well,
And it seems that they're really going to start hitting the weapons inflow from the West. That seems to be in the cards.
Yeah, I mean, there's real tactical reasons for this because, 90% of troop and gear movements in this conflict is by trains because roads, simply are not good for it, right? They,
Sorry, I was just talking to Chad, but go ahead.
yeah, okay. I was wondering why you're offering me cancer sticks.
Well, because I'm trying to be a polite host, man. What can I say? Please have one.
No.
So
okay.
anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fuel costs. I mean, there's a whole number of reasons. The roads are really not equipped for it.
Yeah.
The extra fuel costs are astronomical. Yeah. So everything is done by train, whether we're talking troops, whether we're talking tanks, whether we're talking the constant supplies of ammunition and artillery shells that are needed. And the trains in Ukraine are powered by electricity. Yeah. And so you take down the transformer substations and everything is paralyzed. Yeah. And if you will notice, the Ukrainian counteroffensives, both in Kherson and in the northern Donetsk region towards Lugansk, have ground to a halt since this started. And the impending large counteroffensive, supposedly in Zaporozhye, or from Zaporozhye to whichever left or right they choose to go to, has not yet materialized. So that is probably because their logistics have been really screwed up.
Well, there's the impression from a lot of people that the Russian military is really waiting for November for the ground to harden up to really launch a major offensive.
I don't think the Russian military will see an offensive until late December. I don't think. Why
do you think that?
Because one thing, I don't think they'll have enough of the reservists and the new troops, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the big things, it's not just the 300,000 reservists, right? That's significant. That is going to be the offensive force because these guys are all guys who have military experience before. Yeah. They were all contract. A lot of them had combat experience. So that is going to be the offensive force. But
I've heard different theories that they would be used to rotate professional troops to the front line. I've heard different theories.
Yeah, I've heard that.
There's 300,000. Some of them will be filling gaps. Others will be forming all new offensive units, right?
Yeah, but what I heard was that the majority of those 300,000 are just going to be, put into existing units that are in other places of Russia. And those troops that are currently positioned elsewhere, like on the border of Mongolia or wherever, are going to be pulled in.
Yeah, that's the thing. By bringing in Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, that creates new legal mechanisms, right, within Russian domestic law, that a larger amount of the, largely untapped 1 million active duty troops can then be deployed into defensive positions in those regions, right? Leaving the reservists and the existing, badly, tired SMO forces to have a renewed offensive capability. Plus, there's been another 70,000 volunteers, and that was already of a week ago, who have signed up. So we're looking at least parity now in terms of manpower. And
I watched the video that you made, and you were of the opinion that Ukraine had 700,000 men under arms at this time. I cannot believe that number. I think it's too high.
They say 1 million. Right?
Oh,
they say
say
1 million.
I could say that,
that's number
Japan's best friend.
But it's somewhere between 600 and 700,000. Right?
Okay.
Most of them are conscripts, of course, right?
But they're not combat troops. I mean, originally at the start of this, they had 240,000 in the armed forces of Ukraine.
But still, a lot of those were conscripts.
Yeah, but including all of those battalions, Azov, etc.
No, there was another 50,000 on top of the regular military.
Well, I thought they were like territory. I thought they were the equivalent of the Russian territorial reserves. I mean, that they were
separate. That was a separate.
That's separate. That was largely created after the initial the territorial.
I thought that was cited in part of the original. The numbers I recalled hearing was 240 of regular military. 310 of various other reservists and other types of forces, and something of 50, and something of 50 of quasi national police forces.
Brown shirts,
No, and there were also border guards.
Police, but those were included in that sort of 50 category. 50 of the 310 or something. Yeah.
I think of actual combat troops. I mean, Brian Berletic is of the opinion, and Mark, you've been on his show before. He's great, and Yves, you should cite him on Naked Capitalism because he's really good. He was of the opinion that these offensives have been catastrophic, not just for the loss of life. And these Kiev regime offensives over the last 6 weeks have been catastrophic, not only the loss of life and injured, but also because they're so stretched out that it's going to be an easy thing to just slice through these extended supply lines and just this thinned out troop deployment along the front. I mean, the front is 1,200 kilometers, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's the amount. It's more what he's talking about, and I agree with him. Is the gear that is being expended and destroyed because they cannot replace what the West has already given them. The West has emptied out, all the post-Soviet countries have emptied out all of the old Soviet legacy, the T-72s, the MiGs, that was actually of by far the most use to the Kiev regime forces because that they were trained to use, they were capable of repairing it, maintaining it, they had some spare parts. That was far, far more useful to them.
And by the way, how many foreign fighters are there? Because all these foreign systems, it's indisputable. It seems to me that the HIMARS, the M777s, all these Western doodads, they can't be operated by Ukrainian troops because they're simply not trained on them. It takes months, and so it seems to me the obvious inference that these are either outright NATO people or contractors who 5 minutes ago were part of NATO armies.
Yeah.
What's been the denigration of those forces? Does anybody have a count on that? Okay,
so the last official count was in June. That was the last time the Russian Ministry of Defense put out a count. Originally, close to 5,000 came into the country. By June, through the numbers that had left and the numbers that had been killed or wounded, that number was down to around 1,500, right? But I agree with you that there are far more, quote, mercenaries, unquote, now. And I've heard numbers of polls of in excess of 5,000 at this point. So I don't think it's tens of thousands, but I would not be surprised if those numbers came very close to 10,000 total. Right. And a lot of them are not just your standard, volunteer merc, Reddit warrior, ex-military types. These are troops that have been purposefully, de-officialed and then transferred to, non-official status.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Well, if anything, I had the impression, and maybe this is, maybe you'll, all early on, that a lot of these early volunteers, I think Reddit is the fair comparison, that some of them may have been bona fide mercs, but a lot of them were, enthusiasts who had no idea of what they were getting into.
Yeah.
Call of Duty warriors.
No, there were like a lot of videos at the very start of the war where you had interviews with some of these people who were fleeing the battle zone. And they were saying like, this is not Afghanistan. This is not Iraq.
But I'm saying some of this, there were some cases I read of the U.S. of basically guys showing up from the Midwest who had like basically no meaningful military, like policing experience, not even real military experience.
By far the largest number though is Poles. Poles are easily 70, 80%, followed then, by the United Kingdom. Which have and again, those are almost certainly the purposefully de-active dutied and transferred to the non-official role because all of this Western equipment the Kiev regime can't operate a lot of it. Let's be frank. They don't. Not enough troops have been trained to operate it. It's a real hodgepodge of equipment that they don't have the ability to not only trained enough to use, but they can't repair it. It's all got to be sent back to Poland to be repaired and maintained. It's a logistical nightmare for them, which is why they're Berletic has compared this, I think, very well. Compared it to the Ardennes offensive of Nazi Germany, and in so many levels, that this is a last, all in, everything we have being thrown, and come by the beginning of December, it will have completely exhausted itself, and the West simply does not have the capability to replace. I mean, the first Kiev regime army was already destroyed. The second army was this offensive, this counteroffensive that you're seeing now. But they're all out of T-72s. They're not going to send their own modern main battle tanks. They're the same thing. They've exhausted infantry fighting vehicles, APCs, and the like. Artillery shells, artillery guns. You notice there's no more M777s going, and the amount of 155 round ammunition, they're down to 105 millimeter shells now because they've exhausted.
Did you hear about this? That in some exercise that the Americans were conducting, they told them not to use 155 millimeter shells because they didn't have any more. They had to conserve them.
Right. And this has been openly admitted in the Western press. CNBC, the Canadian state broadcaster, did a piece just a couple weeks ago about how the NATO has been demilitarized at this part. Of anything they had in excess. Of course, they've still got things that they're keeping for if we actually go to war with Russia, but those stockpiles have already been dipped into. The same thing with HIMARS, right? They got another 4. They're promising them another 8 on order, and you'll get them in a couple years. The same thing with most of the air defense that they're promising them. Yeah, we'll construct some new ones for you. Right now, the U.S. can't even supply its existing allies with Patriot system missiles.
There was that story about the Saudis begging for them against the Houthis and them having to be diverted from elsewhere in the Middle East. I've got a slightly different question here. I'm actually a little puzzled that it's taken this long for Ukraine to get into this dire strait, because I remember, over the summer, might have even been the early summer, and this was in the Ukrainian press, how the Ukraine had only gas in only 1/3 of its gas stations. Recall that Russia had been taking out refineries. They had been reduced to using passenger cars, instead of armored vehicles in a lot of cases. I mean, I'm actually, I have to admit, I had expected them to get into, a kind of a dire condition sooner than that, just based on the fuel situation and the armored vehicle situation.
Yeah, I have 2 points to that. I think that it's a combination of 2 factors. Number one, the equipment that the West is supplying, equipment and men, and also the incredible propaganda and the willingness to shoot at retreating soldiers. And so they're artificially keeping up morale, and they're getting supplied by the West.
Yeah, everything's coming from the West. Fuel, everything, right? Yeah, and the West is funding this war right now out of just debt. This is
but it's hard to bring that much fuel in. I mean, you take, the tankers were exposed. Yeah,
it is very hard. And they're having lots of problems, but they shepherded a large amount of the gear they were getting in, and they stockpiled as much energy as they can over months, right? Preparing for this counteroffensives. And they were fairly successful at hiding it in Western Ukraine. And Russia has never taken full air superiority over Western Ukraine, right? I mean, that's painfully obvious. And this ridiculous self-limits of the SMO, a country that has 5 times the population of Ukraine and far more potent a military, was tying their hand behind their back and the other hand with a kid's glove for months, all out of, I believe, the mistaken signaling to NATO that our intentions are limited and we always want to go back to the diplomacy table on the terms that we originally set out, which
I
was
disagree with that. I disagree with that. I think that the reason that they've been fighting with both hands tied behind their back for so long is it wasn't NATO so much as to signal to the global South and East that this is a NATO-Russia war. I think that was really there, because we can all agree, I think, that were it, just head-to-head between the Kiev regime and the SMO, the war would have been over. And I think that we'd all agree with that the only thing that has kept it alive since the summer has been NATO's support in terms of intelligence, all kinds of things. And so I think that what Russia was trying to do was sort of like to slowly pull off that mask for the global South and East. I mean, you got to keep in mind that right now, politically, especially after the Samarkand summits, the Russians are in the driver's seat insofar as most of the world is concerned. And so I think that was their motivation.
Remember early, under the shock and awe of the original sanctions. I mean, Russia was projecting GDP down, themselves 15 to 20%, and the West was projecting it down 25%. They really, the fact that they rebounded so quickly, as we now know, shocked everyone. But that, to Gonzalo's point, they had to be very mindful of securing their relationships with key players in the rest of the world. I mean, having India continue, China, for a while was playing, not so hard as being in Russia's camp. But then I think it was within 2 months they were saying, the war was the U.S.'s fault. And then, keeping India in their camp and having Turkey playing footsie with them as much, which has been driving the U.S. crazy.
China and India is all expected. And you'll notice that Japan has never participated in the anti-energy sanctions because they need Russian energy. There's been that going on. But the biggest standout to me is Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And Saudi Arabia has actually been purchasing large amounts of Russian oil. And you're like, why? Why would Russia purchase oil? Because they use refined Russian oil for their own domestic needs. And then they sell more of their own crude to the West at a higher markup. Right. Well, they're making money hand over fist. And it's nothing to do with support for Russia or multipolarism. It's the Saudis looking out for the Saudis. And Mohammed bin Bone Chopper, Bone Saw, whatever. He has a hatred of Biden at this point that is very personal and very intense. And that's why you see Saudi, and they don't like the idea of the U.S., doing this type of economic warfare with, cutting off of banks and the talk about an oil price cap and going after tanker insurance. They're all like, that could all be used against us someday. We don't like that at all. So they want options, and that's why they're flirting with BRICS and the SCO, and they're decreasing production to purposefully F with Biden's upcoming the congressional elections in the U.S.
Mark, I'm demonetized. You can say fuck.
Okay. Right. So I do so many radio and TV. I have to. I self-censor myself.
Oh shit! I did something by accident. Hang on a second. Go ahead, Yves. What are you saying?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. The idea that the U.S. and the G7. Many people have said how ridiculous this oil price cap idea is, and yet the U.S. and the EU are refusing to drop it. And I think the odds are decent that Russia will, not decent, I think they're very high, that Russia will cut production, just refuse to sell to the West, which would result in a catastrophic price increase. I don't see why Russia should put up with this. And you see, and the Saudis have warned that this. We sort of are seeing a fractured market now. I mean, the oil will cease to be a commodity. It will trade at different prices in different markets. Which is going to be an interesting result.
Yeah, obviously it doesn't matter that the West isn't going to buy Russian oil, right? Russia's already found alternate supplies. The big thing is the secondary efforts that they are supposedly going to be making to go after third-party tankers and insurance for the tankers. They're going to be launching secondary sanctions.
Actually,
against...
that's not what the rules say. The rules are I read the rules. They're putting the liability on the shipper. The shipper is responsible. The tanker can rely on the buyer. Excuse me. They can rely on the representation of the buyer. So it's the buyer, and those are the big traders like the Goldmans. They're threatening. They're threatening to cut the bank. They're basically threatening to, cut access to the banking system of the big traders. They're not putting the onus on the tankers.
Yeah, well, I'm interesting to see how that plays out. But my understanding is that the big consumers, China and India and the like, have already made enough alternate options with, disposable banking and other things that they're willing to put at risk of sanctions.
Yeah.
No, but I've been saying this for a while now. To go back a little bit to the Saudi Arabia issue, I think that the next regime change is going to be Saudi Arabia.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah,
I've been saying this for a while, and it's increasingly clear. And they are in the West, in Washington, they are so pissed off at this OPEC Plus cut, right? I mean, they are just freaking out. Yeah. And then to add insult to injury, did you see the letter that the Saudi Arabia released, the Prime Minister's office, which is MBS? He released this letter basically saying that, the Biden administration asked us to postpone the cut until after the election. We unfortunately couldn't do it. It was like a big fuck you.
Yeah,
it was funny.
It's no secret the U.S. never wanted Mohammed bin Salman to be declared the next heir, right? Yeah. Because there's this question about the succession, right? All the brothers of the original ruler have now served, but who succeeds after the last brother king dies? Does it go to his own son, or does it go back to the original brother who followed son, right? There's no clear definition of how the succession. And the U.S. has a lot of Saudi, princes that have, been all but inducted into the, as CIA assets and the like, that they would have preferred to see be designated as the heir apparent. And Mohammed bin Salman did a good job of killing off, kidnapping, threatening those, a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah, when he put them all in the hotel, and what was it, the Ritz-Carlton? Yeah.
But that was hilarious.
I have no doubt
blackmailed them. It was just basically a kidnapping.
Yeah, kidnapping.
What was his name? Walid had to pay up. Basically 2/3 of his fortune or something like that. It was really
MBS
hilarious.
is total gangster. I mean, he puts Erdogan to shame when it comes to gangsterism.
No,
but I have no doubt that he will be now targeted, and they will be trying to do an internal coup in Saudi Arabia. Propping up other figures.
Aware of that. I mean, he's no fool. And what's fascinating is you see the body language whenever MBS and Putin meet. They're buddies. They understand each other on a level that is just so ridiculous.
I think they've just discovered that they're both cold-hearted bastards that can do business together.
Yeah, exactly.
Between Putin and Xi Jinping,
they'd slit each other's throats if they could, if it came to that. But I'm saying that these two very powerful oil-producing countries that have leaders that are in total sync, that is a catastrophe for the West. Because they can just mess with them till the cows come up.
MBS discovered that rather than deal with the gaggle of the rest of OPEC with, Qatar and everything else, he can simply do a one-person deal with Putin, and the rest of OPEC can just get in line after the two biggest players on the market make a decision. It's worked. Remember, there was a huge oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, pushed by the U.S. after, this all kicked off from 2014 to 2016. That was huge, right? And it was a race to the bottom for both countries. And
I saw some people interpret that differently, that it was a Saudi war on the U.S. frackers.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's Americans thinking that everything is about them.
No, but I'm just saying that. It really did have a now it's probably worked to the U.S.'s advantage, but it slowed a lot of the shale gas development. So shale gas and shale oil.
That was unintended consequences from the U.S. side, and a little bonus for the Saudis.
Hey, Yves, I want to ask you. There headline in the New York Times a couple of days ago that basically said that it was in the headline. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me. I should have prepared for it. I'm sorry, but it said something along the lines of, all these missiles. Russia's running out of missiles, and so they threw their last missiles at this attack, and they were so bad that they didn't kill anybody. So much cope in the West. How is it that the press? I mean, tell us the view of the war if you're a normie following the news, because it seems that any day now Ukraine is going to be knocking on Moscow's door, of course. But are people taking this stuff seriously?
Well, I don't know that anybody's even paying attention outside of the blue city elites. I have the advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, of being in a very affluent and educated pocket of Alabama, which sounds like an oxymoron. But for this,
there are oligarchs everywhere.
Yeah, yes, even at a lower level. Yeah, the zip code I'm in is in one of the top 100 in the U.S. in terms of BAs per capita. But I haven't. People here aren't interested. I haven't seen a single Ukraine flag. I haven't seen anybody bring it up. I mean, we had this intense coverage at the beginning of the war. It was half the news. It was half the news every night. In February, March, April, right? And the start in February. But it's completely dropped off the radar in terms of news reporting, which probably CNN, and the occasional on the other side, Tucker Carlson, getting up and getting indignant. But I was recently in the East Coast in Maine, and there was only one Ukraine, flag that I saw. So I just think these everyday concerns have pushed this out of the headlines. And even though Biden supposedly this is the issue that Biden polls best on is Ukraine, but I strongly suspect if you asked voters to weight how important it was, it's going to be number 9 or 10.
It's the bottom of they've already had those polls. It's the bottom. Americans. I think you're right. Outside the blob and the woke Twitterati and Reddit things, Americans are not engaged in this whatsoever. And
I mean, the flip side is it's not for want of trying. I was telling Gonzalo before we hopped on that the lead story in the Wall Street Journal, literally the lead story, Ukrainian strategy is running circles around Russian forces.
I know. I mean, I've seen so many on YouTube, so much cope on this, and they don't seem to understand the military reality. They do not seem to understand logistics, manpower issues, none of that.
They just repeat what they're told. There's no attempt to understand it. There's no criticality. Now, I mean, there's no question that Russia has been on the back foot for the last 6 weeks, 2 months. And has withdrawn from Kharkov and Kherson, but the reason for it is not some brilliant morale or performance by the Ukrainian military. It's sheer numbers, and the only reason that sheer numbers disparity existed is because of the Kremlin's decision to limit the special military operation. Now that they've removed those restrictions, now it's a whole new war. In terms of manpower, which was, I mean, the strategy was really simple but effective. Russia, they couldn't not take Russia's offensive force in the Donbass, where they're still grinding through the defenses head on, right? One-on-one. That was a losing proposition because of the heavy fires of the Russian battalion tactical groups, the aviation, the artillery, the rocket systems advantages. But if we use all this cannon fodder that we've got really plentiful supply of, and this amount of Western supplied old Soviet tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that we've shepherded, then we can do a mad rush everywhere at once or in quick succession against these lightly garrisoned Russian territories in Kharkov and Kherson. Basically just go around them, envelop them. Very fast-moving diversion reconnaissance group, followed by mechanized infantry, and only then with an armored following. and utilizing cannon fodder. And it is a strategy, particularly in the South, that you had to be willing to throw away tens of thousands of your own people because you're charging into the face of heavy artillery, rocket, and aviation across open steppe. It is a slaughter field down in Kherson. And you saw that it was only late in the game that Russia was forced to withdraw. And that is after inflicting really it just brutal casualties that hurt me to see.
Yes, certainly myself as well, because ultimately, it's a needless loss of life. And you got to look at Clausewitz. You don't fight for territory, you fight armies. The territory will fall by itself, and instead the Kiev regime, following Washington's diktat, is just throwing away lives needlessly and overstretching themselves.
But that's what they have to spend. And
yeah. On top of that, they do not have the armored force to really capture and hold the territory long enough to build coherent defensive lines.
Yeah,
so whatever territory they hold, it's sort of like tenuous. And now you're seeing at Lyman that the Russians seem to be gearing up to do a counteroffensive, and the Kiev regime forces at Lyman are not going to be able to hold it. It's stupid. It's a needless loss of life.
They hoped for a political settlement. They hoped that Russia would politically back down.
No, they thought stupidly that the Kremlin would stage an internal coup and get rid of Putin, and they put Navalny or some crazy ass person like that.
Yeah, well,
it's just irreality.
No, I mean, Zelensky's been making such crazy demands that Russia has to completely withdraw from everything, including Crimea, that I can't think that there's any. They've made it clear they don't want to negotiate. I mean,
he's not a rational.
They only want. Well,
it's Washington.
It's Washington. No, I think this is. I would agree with Gonzalo. This is a position in the U.S. too. They have so dug themselves in that they can't back down by negotiating at this point. So Russia's going to have to impose whatever it imposes, and the West will epically sulk.
And also Russia recently, they said that they are not going to negotiate with the current Kiev regime. They finally cut that line. And they finally decided we're only going to deal with regime change.
Okay,
you don't agree, Mark?
We've heard that. Okay, so I hope for that. Hope for that, right? And there's a lot of Russian bloggers, military analysts, right? Everyone really is hoping for that. But Lavrov said that already several months ago, as well as did Medvedev, right? They've both said that before. Now Medvedev has repeated that, but it hasn't come out of Putin's mouth. So until it comes out of Putin's mouth, it is a negotiating point. Now, I agree with you. I don't believe either the West or Zelensky or the Banderites that are the state within a state will negotiate. Yeah. I still think this conflict will go on for years. I think that Russia will be forced to incorporate, okay, so the Kremlin, Putin did not want any of this. I really believe that, but there are other people in the Kremlin who very much did. But Russia will be quote forced to incorporate all of East Ukraine up to the Dnieper, simply because of defensive realities, right? And the demographics involved with the Russian speaking, Russian leaning population. But to have a real defensive line, the new Cold War Berlin Wall will be the Dnieper River. That's what it's going to come down to. But the big
what about Odessa?
That's the flashpoint. That's what I was just going to say. So the big flashpoint is Odessa, because there's no question that Odessa, beneath the neo-Nazi jackboot, leans Russia, right? We have family there as well. But in whatever rump Ukraine Banderistan state that the West will hope to keep afloat out of this, they're going to need a port. And Odessa is what they'll want. So here is my big fear, that a year and a half down the line, that when Russia starts, casting their gaze finally towards Odessa, that U.S. and Polish forces will stage some type of false flag, perhaps with a tactical nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb, maybe signaled to the regime in Kiev. And they will use that as a pretext to send U.S. and Polish troops into Odessa.
No, I
as part of
disagree.
a safe zone.
I completely disagree.
Why isn't Odessa a priority now? I would have thought that Odessa, the taking the Black Sea coast, would be one of Russia's most important strategic objectives, because it would also make Western Ukraine a weak, independent state. It would greatly strengthen Russia's hand in what it does with rump Ukraine. Why isn't that a military priority now?
Because Russia doesn't have that capability that quickly. I mean,
why can't they devote they've got Kherson now? Why can't they drive west? Why they have their railroads?
Drive west.
Why can't they drive west now?
For a lot of political reasons and also military reasons, Donbass has to be the priority. They have to grind through those fortifications.
No, it's a Mark.
Because Donetsk City is still being.
I have to disagree with your point that the rump Ukraine is going to try to hold on to Odessa and succeed in holding it, and somehow the Poles and NATO are going to wind up landing at Odessa to whatever. No, I think that, look, I personally think that where we're at now historically, and I hate to do these kinds of historical comparisons because they're never one-to-one, but after this past 6 weeks offensive by the Kiev regime, we're basically at roughly January of 45. You know, this offensive is exhausting itself. They're trying desperately now on the Zaporozhye power plant. I mean, way more than ever before, and they're getting just knocked around like nothing. The Kiev regime is at the end of its rope. And there is simply no way for NATO on a logistic level to come into Ukraine, either from the west or much less through Odessa. It's just not possible for them. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the landing gear. They don't have anything to do that. Okay, so I just do not see that happening. At best, the Poles might lurch through Western Ukraine and take Lviv at best. Okay, and in fact, from the start of this war, my thinking was that Western Ukraine would be peeled off by Poland, including Lviv and perhaps Ternopil, and that there would be a rump Ukraine between this Western Ukraine and I mean Western Ukraine over here, from your point of view, and Kiev.
That's
and
Russian
the Russians
propaganda.
would take
That's
everything.
Russian propaganda.
You think it's Russian propaganda? Okay, but here comes the point.
Poland is part of NATO. NATO will not accept Poland taking. I mean, whether they de facto have them, but officially no. That's
okay. But be that as it may, the thing is, see, Odessa is going to be taken imminently. Okay, because all they have to do is from Kherson move west across to Transnistria and cut off Odessa. The Black Sea, the Turks are not letting any warships in, and on top of that, it really is a Russian lake at this point. And so I do not see how Odessa can be the point of resupply by NATO to stage some sort of offensive. I mean, it just does not seem in the cards, and there's certainly not the political will in the West to launch such a massive offensive. And so there, I have to give you pushback. I mean,
I come to also the conclusion from the political reason. In Russia, I mean, part of why Putin had to move so suddenly with this, by his standards, with this partial mobilization, was the bad domestic reaction to Kharkov, which I think was partly, frankly, a messaging and expectations management failure. But I can, turn to that. Odessa is just so important and symbolically in Russia that I have to think that taking that would buy the government just so much time in terms of what they do, how they prosecute the rest of the war.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the next priority is Nikolaev and then Odessa, but not attacking Odessa directly because you destroy it, but rather to envelop it by crossing over to Transnistria. And the fact that they are cutting the supply lines from north to south indicates that that's the overall strategy, that those are the steps. I mean, my thinking at this time is Nikolaev, envelop Odessa, and then eventually come around to enveloping Kharkov. But I think that by that time, the Kiev regime will be no more, and I think that it will be overthrown by a military coup. I'm actually surprised that there hasn't been a military coup so far.
Because I was just surprised, but supposedly, I mean, the reports from the Russia friendlies are that Russia was pulling out of Kharkov, and when the offensive happened, but. I never understood why it was why it was a priority. I mean, Kharkov was going to implicitly your point, Gonzalo, Kharkov is going to fall to Russia regardless. Once the Kiev regime was sufficiently weakened, there wasn't really any need to make it a military priority. So I never understood how they got themselves in the position of having this, big embarrassment.
Kharkov was always.
I'm sorry,
Kharkov
Mark,
was always logistics about Izium and the.
Oh, Izium, I understand that part. Yeah.
That was why. That was why.
And
the
also,
rest of it sort of fell into their hands.
Right.
And also, what happened with Izium ceased to be important.
Logistically important, right? Strategically, right. Yeah, no, I got that.
Yeah.
But they hadn't really reconfigured to deal with that, and Ukraine moved before they had.
Yeah,
exactly. It look bad. Yeah.
Exactly. I think we agree on the broad strokes. We just disagree on the timing.
Right.
Well, look,
right.
I mean, Mark, we're speculating about the future. Yeah. And, that's just a fool's errand. I love doing that. And every time I speculate about the future, man, I mean, if I were a gambler, I'd be broke by now. I'd be beyond broke. I'd be like owing about $10 billion to the neighborhood bookie.
Yeah.
If all my stupid speculations, if I'd put money on them. So please.
Yeah. Well, my shall we say my livelihood depends on my analysis, and I tend to be very sparing and conservative with that. So I don't often go out on the line. And I'm certainly not saying that the West will definitely move into Odessa. I said that's my fear. That is a potential. Right. Yeah, and I would love to see Russia go into Odessa because I have family there, right? Yeah. A distant family, but my wife's family's there. And I agree with you. It's important. I just have not seen the troop positioning yet for that. I also don't believe that the Kiev regime is going to fold. I think that they will go back on the defensive where the manpower, conscripts that they have are far more effective anyway. And just do what they did in the Donbass to less effect because they won't have the extensive fortifications, but they'll turn every building into a firing point, every residential building, and Russia will be forced to devastate every city that they take like they have done so far in the Donbass, because as Amnesty International pointed out, they will turn every hospital, every school, every residential building, and there are enough Banderites yet who will fight longer than Zelensky would, right? Yeah. There might well be a coup at some point in Kiev, but I don't think it will be the military or the there's enough Banderites in the military at this point. I mean, you've all seen Zaluzhny with his little swastika bands on, right? We've all seen his little what do you call it? Norse pagan bracelets, right? With the swastika is a Norse pagan symbol. That's why I'm wearing it, right? Yeah. That kind of apologia. But there's enough Banderites now that I think that the problem is then the question: will the U.S. be willing to openly support someone? I mean, they've been fetting Azov in Congress the last week, right? I mean, so maybe they're already at that point. But up until this point, Zelensky has been such a convenient. I mean, they never loved Zelensky, but Zelensky has turned out to be such a convenient foil for the obvious Banderite neo-Nazi character of the regime and its forces. The simple, but he's Jewish, right? That washes away everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
as if Kolomoisky wasn't.
Yeah, Kolomoisky was too. You're absolutely right, but. Will they be? Had they've sunk so much political and PR capital into making him this vogue heroic figure? Can they really afford to toss him under the bus anytime in the near future? I don't know. That's going to be really costly for them politically, domestically.
Yeah.
I think that my thinking remains that we're not far from the end. But then again, like I said, back in the summer, I was thinking we were not far from the end, and yet here we are still.
Yeah, well, the counterpoint is what is it? I guess this is more your terrain, Mark, but wasn't the Battle of Kursk 2 years before the World War II was over? I mean, this could be and on paper the war was over then, right. And yet it took. I mean, in terms of the Nazi defeat being inevitable, and yet it took 2 years for the whole thing to definitively unwind.
In February, I said that this would be a forever war, and I stand by that assumption.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it can enter frozen conflict phases. There will be ceasefires, but I think that at some level, what is the former Eastern Ukraine, which will eventually be, all be part of Russia again, will be at war with Banderistan at some level for the rest of my life. I truly believe that.
And let me ask you something else, Mark. The whole situation in Belarus where the Russians are amassing troops. I haven't been following that as carefully as I ought to. What do you think of that situation? Do you think it's a fixing operation, or they're really planning to?
I honestly don't know. Both are real possibilities. The question is, if it wasn't a fixing operation, then what would the goal be? Another decapitation strike at Kiev? That didn't work out so well the first time, right? Because that was predicated on the belief that there would be an arranged internal coup, right? Or standing down of the military. But that whole plan was by the FSB. That whole plan was obviously fully compromised in Kiev. It worked great in Kherson and Zaporozhye. Yeah. I mean, they stood down. There was hardly any fighting. It worked great there. So mixed results. Yeah. But obviously that's not arranged now. That's not going to happen. So the utility of trying to surround Kiev, I don't see it. And Chernihiv and Sumy are strategically useless, right? There's no point to that. So I tend to lean more towards the fixing operation at this point. But I really don't believe that Botka is going to send troops into Ukraine. I do not see that happening. I would be pleasantly surprised if it happens. I would love it, but I don't see Belarus getting involved.
Because what they've set up, what the Russians have set up, they've set up, 1,000 Russian troops have come in or something like that. But what people have been noticing is it's not 1,000 troops or how many thousands of troops. It's rather it's leadership troops. It's command and control structures that are being set up in Belarus, as opposed to just putting a few battalions or whatever there. And so it seems that they might be gearing up for something. At the same time, there are a lot of speculation that what the Russians are really planning is some sort of like slicing operation going from north to south, from Belarus all the way to Odessa or something. That's what I've been hearing in different channels. That's absurd, because that's discounting the incredible size of Ukraine. It's geography that would
not logistically possible.
Yeah, you'd never have enough troops to be able to protect such an enormous salient if it were coming from Belarus south to Odessa or something like that.
It's got to go east-west. It has to.
Yeah.
So
And
but they're doing something, right?
Yes.
I had not heard of that about the command and control, and I will pay attention to that. But they've pulled some maverick things, and
they've done some very interesting.
General Armageddon is supposedly known as a hardline maverick. So
I was on there was some YouTube channel they were doing like some stream, and this moron. I mean, I could not believe what he was saying. He was saying that the new general whose name slips my mind, Commander-in-Chief
Surovikin, isn't it? Am I pronounce? I'm not Surovikin, isn't it? Surovikin. Okay, I don't have the pronunciation right. Okay.
Yeah. Surovikin, right? He claimed this commentator, this random fool, was saying that he's actually a missile officer. He likes to use missiles, and I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not like you have one general who loves tanks and another who likes air power and another who likes artillery. It doesn't work that way. And I'm like, this is the level of commentary. And the tragedy was that there were thousands of people listening to this fool. And I was watching the chat, and they were all like, hey, Slava Ukraine and all this stuff. And the level of detachment from reality is what I find remarkable in the West. And they're going to come in for a big surprise at some point. And I actually want to see that surprise. I want to see their faces when the whole thing goes tits up. And so that's why I don't want it to be a forever war, or if only for Schadenfreude. I want to see when the whole thing blows up, and what are they going to say then?
Well, the other reason I have...
It's Surovikin.
Surovikin.
You're right. It's Surovikin.
Okay. But the other reason I have some doubts about it going on forever is just the way we're continuing to eye poke China.
Oh God, yes. What the hell is that all
we
about?
act like we have unlimited resources, and how with pouring all this, what we have into Ukraine, and then getting ugly with China. I don't know that we can keep. We're going to be in a position to do much to help the Banderites in 5 years, to be blunt.
Possibly, but the Banderites will fight to the end, no matter what they have. I mean, even if the support from the West dies off, that will not completely end an insurgency, counterinsurgency, strikes across the Dnieper. 50 years of the Soviet Union couldn't get the Banderism out of West Ukraine. I don't see that anything will. And
the CIA was supporting them. The CIA was the Banderites were promoting this through the 90s. The 90s.
Yeah, so, again in the 90s. You're right. They were the CIA actually led an insurgency of ex-SS veterans from West Ukraine in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, right? Yeah. I mean, the CIA led it on the ground. That's freedom of information available, that was exposed stuff. And I mean, then we question, why did the Cold War start? Boy, I wonder,
Wonder why?
Yeah, I wonder why.
I had no idea that the CIA and the Western powers were so involved in Western Ukraine during the late 40s and into the 1950s.
Yep.
Well, no, Scott Ritter says it goes up to the fall of the USSR, and then the funding and support model changed after the USSR. Now, I don't know what his sources were, but he says it went all the way through.
Well, I would take anything that he says with a grain of salt, because he declared me dead. Then he's claimed that I'm an SBU agent, and then he insisted that Aiden Aslin had been executed. And then the very next day, he appeared, on TV being shipped off back to Britain. And he also claimed that the M777s were a game lose. Source, I would not be a fantasist. I'm sorry. I'm very adamant about the guy. I despise him. Hello? Right. Are you guys there?
I will refrain from comment. I'm a team player.
No. I mean, like, if you disagree, that's perfectly fine, and you want to be friends with him.
No, I don't. I'm not saying.
No, I'm not friendly with him, but I'm just saying that he seemed to. This was something where he seemed to have knowledge from his days involved with NATO, which is different now when he is basically not very good or erratic in his ability to interpret information when he doesn't have inside sources. So I think his commentary on historical matters can be taken a bit more seriously than his commentary on current conditions.
As the case may be, but I despise the guy. I mean, I think that he's a loser.
Well, that's ad hominem fallacy.
No, I don't associate with child molesters. You know what I'm saying? And he's one. He's a convicted one. So there's that. But anyway,
it was actually a sting, and it was porn.
I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it. Yeah. But anyway, the point remains, and it's a very serious point, is what exactly is going to be happening with the NATO support, because it seems to be winding down. It seems that the NATO, they're just out of equipment and they're out of political will, because now Europe is catastrophic. And also the thing that I'm really curious about is that why is it that the Germans took the destruction of Nord Stream so calmly, so like cattle to the slaughter kind of thing?
Because of the who's in charge of Germany now, Baerbock, Schultz. I mean, but I get the feeling that between the two of them, Baerbock is wearing the pants in that family, and she is a pro-U.S. exceptionalist, anti-Russian. I mean, what she has to do with actually being green, I don't have the slightest idea, because she's got Germany burning coal again. Yeah, I think they should rename them the Coal Black Party, but it's purely ideological, and they're running out of stuff, but I do not see the collapse in political will yet. I mean, yes, let's talk the air defense that the West is trying to scramble together. Yeah, it's not going to have any huge effect because it's not networked. It's a hodgepodge of different pieces and everything. But look at the political will of Germany sending even a handful of irises to to Ukraine before their own military gets one. That's insane.
Yeah,
that is political commitment. I'm sorry. I mean, military effectiveness, something's better than nothing, right? But the political will there, yeah, okay, so Hungary and Serbia are doing their own thing now, but and France is always flipping back and forth between the most ardent and the weakest, just that being Macron's mercurial nature, I guess. But Germany and Denmark and the Poles and the Baltics, I mean, they're still in the driver's seat of the EU as far as I can see.
Well, back to the point about why is Germany so complacent, I think it's, again, unfortunately, we're seeing how effective propaganda is. I mean, the Germans in particular, but Europe in general, had been told that, Putin's a bad guy, Putin's using energy as a weapon, and admittedly, Russia was engaging in these legalistic excuses about the world traveling turbine parts, right? But,
sure. After the West weaponized their entire economies against Russia.
Oh, look, I'm not disagreeing. And in fact, after Stuxnet in Iran, I wouldn't take any piece of equipment that I wasn't sure of its provenance. I mean, who knows? That thing has got to have electronics in it. Who knows what nasties could have been put in it? I'd be very leery of taking it without some kind of Siemens, and Siemens is in a position to give the guarantees. So I think there were reasons that they, probably weren't willing to say in public, for this.
Oh, well, by the way, yeah, just a quick note. I sent you guys something in the private chat. By the way, one of the things that's really interesting about this whole situation is how the Russian weaponry and the Iranian weaponry, these kamikaze drones, as they're called, it compares so much better than to the Western weaponry that requires so much maintenance and tender loving care and whatnot. And the fact, of course, is that they're not workable because the vaunted air defenses that the Kiev regime had were no match for this missile strike of the last few days. And so it seems to me that from how can I put it? From a military equipment sales point of view, from a marketing point of view of Raytheon, this war has been a disaster. I mean, Yves, would you agree?
Yeah, but fortunately, the people are, it's, I hate to say it, I'll give you a bizarre example, but in the South, they use completely different, not completely different, but they only use a subset of dental parts that you can get in the rest of the country. So it's only like being able to get Honda car parts down here. And these countries are basically locked into Western equipment. So even if they recognize the Western equipment hasn't performed, they've got enormous. It's back to the point that both of you have been making about Kiev dealing with disparate weapon systems. They've got enormous switching costs even before you get to the geopolitics. They're stuck with the girl they brought.
Yeah. And so they're running out of the West. The West is running out of equipment. I've said this metaphor before. The Western leadership class is kind of like trust fund babies that they keep on drawing from the trust fund, thinking that the trust fund is limitless. And all of a sudden they're realizing, holy cow, we're running out of money. In this case, we're running out of gear. We're running out of levers of power that we can pull to get our way. Because the sanctions, a disaster. And it's been a disaster for the West. I mean, Europe is dead. Europe this winter, they're going to go cold and hungry and in the dark, and without even cellular phones. The United States, this is just adding to the inflation problem. I mean, it seems that they are trust fund babies running out of money. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
Well, we're up to what, $31 trillion of debt in the U.S. I mean, the money machine keeps going burr. Yeah. I mean, it's starting to slip out of their hands, and the de-dollarization is still small, but it's real now, right? So that is the elephant at the end of the tunnel, but you can see the end of the tunnel now.
Well, I hate to tell you, it took for the pound to be displaced as the world currency of its day. It took 2 world wars and a Great Depression. It was 30 years. Yeah. There's so much institutional inertia. That
it'll take decades.
It'll take decades. So unfortunately, from the perspective of the rest of the world, it's very, not to say that they won't do it, but it's very messy doing bilateral currency trades. They'll do it, they'll do it, but it's a very high friction way of doing business. So that's going to prevent it from really taking off anytime soon.
So you think that the dollar is going to be shored up by international trade?
It's by the fact that when you trade, basically almost nobody in the world everybody wants to be a mercantilist except the US. Everybody wants to run a surplus. If you run a surplus, you got to take somebody else's money. Do you really want that money? Do you really want that currency? Can you invest in it? Is there capital markets that you trust to put it in? Otherwise, you have to otherwise it's effectively backstopped by the central bank of the other country. So it's all this messy, unless people run very close to balanced trade with each other, you've got this mess of what do you do with the currency you've got? And the US, like it or not, we have very deep liquid capital markets that by world standards are very well regulated, so we're still the best of a bad bunch in that respect.
And also nobody wants to carry the responsibility and the nightmare of having the reserve currency. Certainly not the Russians, certainly not the Chinese.
The Chinese haven't positioned their currency at all towards an alternative. There simply is no clear alternative at this point. So I agree with you. The best of the bad.
Maybe Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is foolish.
But the U.S. is forcing other countries to go the route of that messy bilateral trade.
I agree.
They're forcing other countries to do it, which is, that's their overextension of their hegemonic economic grip. And
but to turn a little bit to the Eurozone, what I'm seeing is that the Europeans don't seem to realize that they have a supply issue. There is no energy supply. And so they're figuring, what we'll do is we'll just print up a bunch of euros and give it to people so that they can buy this limited supply of energy. They don't seem to understand that, it doesn't matter how many, euros you print, if there's just not enough electricity and not enough natural gas, not enough oil, gasoline to go around for everybody. Doesn't matter how much cash you put into people's pockets. I mean, it looks like they're hell-bent for leather on destroying their own currency. Is that an accurate analysis?
Borrell just finally said in the last 2 days what I've been saying since March, is that it has become painfully obvious how much European prosperity for the last few decades has relied on and been a result of cheap, reliable Russian energy. Borrell said it. Our prosperity was due to Russian energy, and that prosperity is now over. It's done.
And what's, and I don't know how long this is going to take to play out, but all these people, Macron, that's a more extreme, more clear-cut statement of what Macron said with his, end of abundance. And they seem to have lost sight that the legitimacy of governments in modern times depends on delivering either at least a stable or better yet increasing a standard of living. The Chinese have been terrified of that. That's why, despite the fact that it's being an authoritarian government, they've been desperate to maintain growth. And frankly, the West loses sight that that's why, Putin has been in charge for so long. He delivered a 5%, 5 times increase in GDP per capita. That buys you a lot of cred with voters. They'll put up with a lot if you've made their lives better on a very tangible level.
Yeah, it's simple. Deliver, bread and circus. You deliver those, you're pretty much set. I don't know how much circus there is in Russia, but there's certainly bread. And
circuses are a huge cultural institution in Russia, going back to the Soviet days. It's really big.
And they have their great music. They have their great music.
They're much better. Circuses are a real profession in Russia. They're much more serious and retro than they are in the US.
Wow.
I've been to a couple. I've taken my kids there here in Kharkov. And they're a lot of fun. I enjoyed myself. I thought, oh man, I got to go to the damn circus with the kids. But no, it was like a lot of fun, and dancing bears and the whole thing. Like old school kind of stuff, and not age appropriate. That's the key issue. Which in the United States, man, what the hell is going on? But that's a social topic that we'll touch on later. I wanted to get to that. But insofar as the current situation, what I'm noticing is that this war, insofar as Putin and the Kremlin and the leadership class, it could not be going better, because all of a sudden they've got pretty much all of the South and East on side. The war is grinding along, and people are content. If anything, they're saying, you know, go further. Because of the partial mobilization, they've had this key class of people of Western-focused people leaving, or else realizing, hey, the West hates us, and they want nothing to do with it. So all of a sudden, it's turning much more Russophile, and both India and China are realizing that their future depends on a good relationship with the energy producer, Russia. And so, from their point of view, I mean, if I'm playing, you know, the Kremlin side of the chessboard, I'm thinking, man, I got a strong position here. I'm doing very well, not merely in the military sense, but in the political and geopolitical level. I mean, Mark, would you agree?
Well, they did just have that UN vote where everybody, was it today, where
General Assembly vote means nothing.
Yeah.
It's
no, but it's a soft power indicator. Russia took a soft power hit from having to do the annexation. I mean, I think it would have been nicer if they could have, you know. But I guess you're saying that's one thing I've never quite understood, the military restrictions, that they had to become part of Russia. They couldn't be some kind of Novorossiya, you know, and look a little, you know, voted for independence in some form, and been, you know, an effective Russian captive without being a part of the Russian state.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was all about this naive signaling to NATO. But
also my thinking is that Putin is an extremely legalistic person.
Yeah, he is
and,
very much.
And,
very much.
And
Yeah.
I mean, he's a trained lawyer after all. But also, there's something else too. That legalism is what has allowed him to guide Russia in a direction where it is much more free than Ukraine is, for instance, of the power of the oligarchs. Sure. By using power,
huge,
by
of course, yeah.
Because I mean, we have to look at Ukraine and Russia and compare the two insofar as the political and power dynamic going on. Because Ukraine, from 91, when it got its independence, it basically became a series of fiefdoms of oligarchs.
Yeah,
and these oligarchs were bloodsuckers. Ukraine is a rich country. It has natural resources. It has food production, all kinds of good stuff. It's got nuclear power up the wazoo because, you know, it was the largest nuclear reactor in Europe and so forth. And it has a people that are just exceptionally well educated, hardworking, decent people. And yet it's one of the poorest countries in Europe because of the oligarchs. And that was the fate that the West wanted for Russia, and still wants, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And I tend to think, and I'm not cheerleading, I'm just looking at it objectively. It seems to me that Putin's legalism and the way that he would constantly cut the corners of the oligarchs until they got nice and small and round and easily digestible. That is what has prevented Russia from following the same fate of Ukraine. That legalistic approach. Do you agree, Mark?
Yeah. I mean, there are other factors other than just the legalism, right? I mean, the strong control of the Siloviki security state. But yeah, I mean, that is the big, huge difference, is that Putin not only leashed the oligarchs to the state, but he literally turned them into disposable stewards.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Whose position depends on the goodwill of the state and their performance. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is a huge difference where, interestingly enough, Ukraine, in the state of war, you know, the total declaration of power by Zelensky, finally, the oligarchs have actually been sidelined by Zelensky for perhaps the first time. I mean, he's really taken total power of the media in the country, which was their big leverage of influence. So, you know, it's going to be interesting what comes out of that rump state there eventually, but things might actually not necessarily change for the better, but you might see some change there. But I'm not a big believer. I think Putin is smart, an extremely efficient manager of Russia's competing elites. I think he's pragmatic. cynical realist like me. But I also am not a big believer in that he's some 5D chess god either. I think he's made a lot of mistakes, and his particularly his Germanophilia has really hurt Russia a number of times. Hopefully he's finally cured of it now. I think they've made a lot of mistakes.
Did you hear, by the way? Did you hear, by the way, that one of the pipelines of Nord Stream 2 is still operational, and he's offering it to the Germans? And
yeah. That's trolling. That's trolling.
That's trolling.
But
that's master
also,
trolling.
the Druzhba pipelines have now also suffered from the bringing oil through Belarus and Poland have now also been sabotaged.
Is it sabotage, or is it just simply just?
The polls say it's not. The Serbians say it is. And interestingly, on Interfax, I saw Russia announcing that it's building new tankers. It's going to get new tankers up to deliver the gas to deliver oil by tanker that could have been delivered by that pipeline. So I think that's a strong signal from what Russia thinks this is about.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn a little bit to the States insofar as the economy and the political situation is concerned. I mean, I've been following a lot of people, talking to a lot of people in the States. I follow a number of video bloggers who are very small, under 1,000 subscribers, but they talk about the on-the-ground situation in the United States. And it seems that it's really falling apart. I mean, Yves, can you, I can't.
Again,
Mark got bored and stepped away.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I don't, get out enough to have a good sense. The housing market, surprisingly, and the housing market has fallen apart on the low end, but the higher end it hasn't. Simply in appearance, simply due to dearth of supply. Anybody who's got a mortgage at a decent rate is not going to give it up to buy house, and take on a new and vastly reduce their purchasing power by taking on a much higher interest rate mortgage. So the housing market looks better, on paper than it is. You've got this. The Biden administration has it's a version of what we've got in Europe. We've got just terrible leadership, top to bottom. I can't point to a governor, and it's not even the federal level. I can't point to governors that look very good. Hello? Do you hear me?
I can hear you, Yves.
Okay. So in any event, now it's because I was cutting in and out because we've had thunder here. So I thought it was me.
No, I think that we all went out. It must be either the FSB or the SBU or perhaps the FBI. In
my case, when I went down early, it was that the internet went down here early today because we've had thunder. That also happens down here. But
unfortunately, we're all back. And by the way, Mark, the chat was wondering if the SBU was knocking on your door. Tell us.
The guy outside the room with the gun to my head, he gave me my marching orders for overtime.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good to know. No, I had to move because I had to plug in my computer, my laptop. But anyway,
but I think this country's just we've been in a long, slow decline in living standards that's now starting to accelerate rapidly. The Biden administration refuses to, both sides in Washington, I would say. I mean, even though the Biden is sort of more visible, I don't think the Republicans would behave that much differently.
Oh, no.
They're in total denial, to the extent of the fact that the sanctions have just, given a big turbocharge to the inflation here. They're in denial of the fact that the supposed labor force tightness is due substantially to COVID. I mean, we've got a labor force participation rate that's low, that's lower than it was before COVID hit, which suggests that the unemployment shouldn't be as low as it is. It's because people aren't working. I mean, I've seen this even at my dentist. Normally if you need something, like I mentioned crowns earlier, normally if you need something done, it takes a week. You go in, they find something, you need a crown, the dentist puts it back in a week. That's how long it takes a lab. Fewer. It takes like 3 to 4 days for the lab to turn a crown around. It took a month because the dentist didn't have staffing and she had to do the work herself. And normally she has an assistant with her when she's doing that kind of work. She's had so many people sick. Multiply that across, now admittedly dentists are more exposed, right? Because they're in people's faces. But nevertheless, multiply that across the economy. You've got a lot of people who are sick. You've got a lot of people who have long COVID. And, we're not willing to do simple things to reduce, we've made it all about the vaccines when the vaccines just have not been effective.
Don't talk about that.
And we're not,
because I got struck because of remarks on that particular, on the malady and the medicine.
No, they're not that. It's not even. It's. You can see it in the data. They're not that effective. I mean, that's why they're having to move to boosters. And we're not willing to do simple things like there are cheap ventilation devices you can build called Corsi Rosenthal boxes. Schools that have installed them have kids are infection vectors.
Yves, I'm going to ask you, please don't talk about that particular issue anymore, because I got struck, and the next time I get struck, I'm going to get deleted. So please don't talk about that.
Okay,
sorry about that. I should have mentioned that before.
Okay.
But no, the thing insofar as the labor participation rate is concerned is, I think also there is a demoralization of the American population. I mean, I notice it everywhere that people are demoralized. It's not just, that they're ill or that they have, maladies of various sorts. It's that they're demoralized. They're like, what is the point? I work like a dog. I've got 3 jobs. I'm doing Uber Eats and God knows what else. And I can barely afford food or gasoline to go to these, muck jobs or Uber jobs or whatever it is. I think it's a demoralization of the populace. I think that that's the real problem going on. And the leadership in the United States is not giving people anything to strive towards or look forward towards. It's just, bleakness. And I think that it's an accelerating process.
No, I agree. It's like it's the long effect of neoliberalism. The U.S. has corporate profit as a share of GDP is now twice the level that it was in the early 2000s when Warren Buffett deemed it to be unsustainable. So we see ordinary workers, to your point, ground down more and more. People don't have vacations. They can't get sick days. They're physically exhausted if they aren't in one of these, high adrenaline, high pay positions where, they get juiced on working all those hours because they have status and they get to hang out with, nominally smart. You love that word, smart people doing important things. If they don't have those psychic bennies and the pay, and a good pay level. But even then, to your point, even about the stress, among even the elites, that when you've got a very stratified society, which is what we have, if you lose your perch, you fall way down. You see, suddenly your kids can't go to the private schools. You can't go on the ski holidays with your friends. You might have to sell your house and move into a lesser school district. Suddenly your social network is gone, right? And that's so even among the better off, there's all this anxiety to stay in place, and it's not even the classic. Well, it sort of is keeping up with the Joneses because all those activities, go with keeping up with your social network. It's not even so much wearing the right clothes. It's that you have to belong to the club. You have to do whatever vacation thing. You have to do the things that are appropriate for, your supposed status with your kids, all that stuff.
Yeah. And also what happens inevitably is that we always live to the fullest insofar as our salary is concerned. You can be making $1,000 a month or $20,000 a month. And we always wind up, as people, spending everything that we've got. And when that supply of cash starts to dwindle, or the cash doesn't buy as much as it used to, all of a sudden you're in a deep hole very, very quickly. Right. And so even if you're gainfully employed, just the inflation alone is probably killing you.
Right.
Right. And so I think that demoralization is something that, nobody in the West is talking about. But you see it in all these symptoms of labor participation rates, for instance, and stuff like that. So I don't see how the United States can pull out of this hole. Other than printing, and that's my fear, that they're going to start printing, and that we're like like you always see those graphs of the German currency, the Reichsmark during Weimar Germany. That it was like it goes up and then spikes up.
Okay, I want to differ with you. I want to differ with you a little bit because monetarists. Because we come to same conclusions, but I don't like this terminology printing because it doesn't describe the phenomenon accurately. If printing caused inflation, Japan would have been in hyperinflation by 1997. Okay, monetary creation. You've got monetary supply, you've got monetary velocity, and a lot of the money creation, particularly by QE, has gone into assets. It has not gone into real economy spending. So look, we had a decade of it, right? We had more than a decade. We had from all the massive QE after the QE money creation after the crisis, and we did not really get meaningful real economy inflation. What produces hyperinflation, now the flip side, what produces severe inflation or hyperinflationary situations, to your point, and money creation can be is a piece of this, but the big driver is when you've got too much demand in an economy relative to real resources, relative to food, housing, gas, all those things. So what have we had? Now Germany went into hyperinflation because they had a reduction of real economy capacity as a result of the reparations put on them, right? The whole settle,
the whole and losing
Versailles Treaty, right. So they had a big reduction of real economy. That's the same thing happened in Zimbabwe with what happened with the farmers. So those are the kind of situations that generate hyperinflation. Now we are seeing a version of that because we have had a reduction in real economy capacity that nobody wants to admit. Again, the workforce with the COVID, the supply chain shocks, the not being able to have enough cars because of the chips from China, we had erratic supplies of everything from durable goods like washers. Everything uses chips now. Washers use chips, but we've also had it in things like wood and copper, because I was hearing from somebody in the upper Midwest that he was having great trouble with it, with his workforce for various reasons with respect to COVID. So it's happening all across the economy that we're having supply reductions, and at the same time, we had this big deficit. It's the deficit spending. It's not the financing. It's not the money supply. It's when you have deficit spending in excess of the economy's ability to absorb to satisfy the demand. And the thing that the monetarists get hung up on is that in a capitalist economy, basically the capitalists don't like full employment because it reduces their status, right? They don't have enough leverage over the workforce. So there is a role for government deficit spending up to a point, particularly if it helps build productive capacity in the economy. Now, the U.S. we don't do industrial policy, so we don't do our spending. We don't spend in a particularly intelligent manner. Although even some raw demand creation to make up for the fact that businesses chronically underinvest would be helpful. But we've just gone, we went crazy with the COVID, and that was very badly directed spending. I mean, it did keep the economy from falling over, but a lot of it was just incredibly poorly directed, and now we're in this situation where the Biden administration is spending like a drunken sailor on Ukraine and other things. It's just astonishing. So I'm coming to similar conclusions, but from like a different, reasoning.
No, you're coming from it from a much more orderly and not mechanistic, but much more looking at all the particular factors. And I was just like broad stroking it.
Yeah.
But we're coming to basically the same conclusion. Look, the weird thing is that the situation that the United States finds itself in today, I always think of Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot back in the
giant sucking sound. Yes, I voted for Perot.
yeah, and the thing is, everything he said is turning out to be true.
Yeah,
everything. I mean, he was exactly right. He said back in '92 that the U.S. has no industrial policy and it's exporting its industrial base, and this will be an eventual catastrophe. And here we are.
Right.
And the only thing that's keeping up the United States economy, if you think about it, from what we were talking earlier, is the foreign exchange and the need for the rest of the world to prop up the dollar for reasons of their own. Would that be an accurate assessment?
We do have, I mean, again, I'm not really in a position to judge, but just before we got on, I was looking at
let me put it to you a different way.
We have the fact that we could whack Huawei with cutting off their access to certain U.S. tech says we do have something. It may not be much, but we do have something of a tech advantage in certain sectors. So it wouldn't be quite that broad, but yes, we've certainly given away manufacturing. We're never going to get that back. And how much can you make on intellectual proproperty, to run an economy?
Let me ask you this. Suppose I snap my fingers, like that stupid, comic book movie. I snap my fingers, and all of a sudden, the dollar in terms of international trade and the capital market liquidity is replaced by, say, the Chinese yuan. I'm making this up.
Yeah.
What would happen to the American economy? It would be toast the next day. It would be over. Because the only thing keeping it alive is the fire sector. I mean, it seems that paradoxically, the thing that I think the cancer on the American economy that led to deindustrialization was the financial, insurance, and real estate economy that just was so profit driven that it was willing to overseas all the industrial base of the United States to the American detriment. But now it's the only thing keeping it alive. That's my point of view on the issue. Do you agree?
Yeah, while we're talking, I'm looking at how much in the way of imports we have to GDP.
Yeah.
And
No, it's not much.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I don't think we would quite sink into the ocean. We would have the problem is we would have more difficulty than we should adjusting to be more of an autarky. We have a lot of the resources that we could become a lot more of an autarky, but you know, we've completely abandoned any kind of you know, middle level manager, well trained, you know, working class people, ex plumbers, HVAC, you know, people, and the kind of people who lay granite counters, right? You know, I mean, you know, so we would have a lot of skill rebuilding to do, and it would take a while.
But what about the European economy?
Oh, that's a train wreck. I mean, that's just you know, I don't know how they recover from this energy shock. I mean, I just don't, because they are, to your point, you know, as others have said, Germany's going to deindustrialize. People haven't talked as much about Italy, but Italy's the other big industrial engine of Europe, and it's also a big Russian gas user. So I don't know how they get by. I mean, I really don't. I
mean, and we're including the United Kingdom in when we talk about Europe.
For the purposes
Brexit,
of
Brexit aside,
they're still economically very much tied to the EU, despite wanting not to be.
I'm hearing all kinds of things. I lived in London a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. And you know, I have some acquaintances back there still, and they're telling me that things are really falling apart in the United Kingdom, at least in England. Okay.
Well, the NHS, and on top of that, the NHS, apparently the NHS, you know, the Tories' great project. I mean, that was one of the things that I think made a big difference to the Brits was the fact that they have, you know, a good healthcare service, and the Tories went after that tooth and nail. And now that's cracking under, you know, all kinds of, you know, health issues also. I mean, it's falling apart. So, I
think, I forget who said this. I heard this yesterday. Basically, it seems as if the Bank of England is making a power play against the Truss government at this time. Basically, they're, you know, for all intents and purposes, they seem to be aiming at regime change in the British cabinet. Well, what have you heard about that?
Yeah, well, there's some Richard Murphy in particular is arguing that today. He's
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, basically, I mean, there was already this, you know, big City of London unhappiness about the first version of the mini budget. And then Truss and Kwarteng has not backed down that much, but they're doing hand waves. I mean, I saw a Twitter discussion of, they were just in front of Parliament today, and apparently the Tory backbench was completely silent. You know, it was kind of shuffle, shuffle, mumble, mumble from Truss and Kwarteng, and they're making vague promises about how they're gonna support, you know, some, you know, social spending with no details, when before their body language was they were going to cut it aggressively. You know, so they've done this huge flip flop, but no details as to the flop. And in the meantime, Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, has been saying that the pension funds basically have to get themselves straightened out by Friday. That he's stopping the bond buying as of then, and I guess he thinks he can rescue the banks by then, because he's worried about the banks. He's not worried about the pension funds, and some pension funds are having to sell as much as 20% of their assets to raise the cash they need to deal with these crazy liquidity driven investments, that hedges they made. So they made a bunch of stupid hedges they didn't understand that blew up. And the Bank of England.
Explain that a little bit, because
I'm enormously frustrated. No one has explained the mechanics of these very well, and I can't stand it when I see people banding terminology about and don't explain it. So I've yet to see a good explanation. But basically, these were hedges that were supposed to insulate the pension funds from interest rate movements. And because they were supposedly protected from interest rate movements, they could therefore go make more risky investments. And now the hedges blew up, and they're having to sell investments to cover the hedges. So basically, they were sold a defective product that blew up.
So they were on the wrong side of the trade. Basically, it was basically an options play, and they fucked up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, the people who sold it to them, didn't either test for or allow for the extreme conditions that have developed.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, because of course, they always model in the last few years when it's steady as a rock, and so then they figure, oh, it'll be like steady as a rock forever. They
right.
don't think of the political contingencies and all the rest of it for the risk assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah, morons. Well, I mean, financial people. I mean, I come from a financial background insofar as my family is concerned, and I've run a little money in my time. You, Yves, were neck deep in that whole thing, and you know how these financial types are. They always think that they're so goddamn clever until they're not, until they're shown to be, in that famous phrase of Warren Buffett's, swimming naked. Yeah, it's always the same story. They always think that they're so damn clever until it blows up in their face.
Well, this is one thing, and Mark, the one thing, hopefully Russia will never let its economy become very financialized. In a way, it's worse because we've got all these asset managers, and there's a joke. There's one writer I really loved at the Financial Times, John Dysart, who is just so arch. And he would joke about how if you're in money management, you have a resume put. You have 9 years, 9 years things are fine, and 1 year everything blows up, and then year 9 plus 1, you've got a new job, right? It's everybody blows up the same way,
YBG,
and yeah, exactly, you're forgiven. So you've got just terrible incentives in the financial services industry that hardly anybody eats their cooking.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Mark, I saw that you were interacting with chat. Do you want me to make you a moderator?
No, that's okay. That's okay. I shout out to chat. Yes, my dogs are really not interested in either events in Ukraine or the financial markets in the West, and they're quite happy dreaming about their next walk in the forest. And my crows are avidly interested though, because they're avid investors. They're some of the
they're smart.
My three disabled control crows are actually part of the New World Order. The secret cabal. They actually run everything. They're in charge here.
Well, my thinking about the British situation is that Truss is not long for this earth. That's my thinking. That she's going to get the boot pretty soon. So shockingly, we're going to have had David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss. We're potentially going to have a 5th prime minister in less than 5 years.
Right.
I mean, it seems that that's the direction of travel at this point.
Right, and nobody thinks much of some of the commentary I saw in the Parliament discussion today was that the body language was that the Conservatives are so disgusted with Truss that they'd rather have early elections and risk losing their seats than continuing, which may mean they'd rather hand Keir Starmer the poison chalice of being prime minister, knowing that he'll make a mess of it too.
Good God. I mean, they're basically contemplating, suicide is better than discontinued existence. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah, no,
Holy cow.
But yeah, so I don't know what we're going to, and again, I don't know. The worst is I don't know that regime change, in any of these capitals in Europe is going to make a difference either. In terms of, they're all still wedded to the same policies. The same. Russia. Keep the sanctions on no matter what. Even if Russia were to, comprehensively win, and Zelensky were somehow to be discredited. God knows, the West decided to throw him under the bus and, portray him as having, admit to his drug habits and God knows what else.
Well, if they caught him snorting a picture of him snorting coke in a pile of money, maybe that would work. But
people really underestimate what a stable and powerful system the political theater of being able to play sleight of hand and shift between center right and center left in Western governments are. It can endure almost any political and economic shock. It is incredibly stable, and they will do it again. And governments like Macron and Schultz, they will fall. And the Pepsi alternative to the Coke will take its place, and people will avidly, vote it into office, and nothing will change, just like always.
Yeah, it won't be.
Well, that depends how much the standards of living fall. I think that's dependent on a certain level of adequate living standards, and there
I
are
agree. I agree.
points, and I again, you know, Italy, where it's warmer and they have a tradition of fractiousness.
Yeah,
Italy, Italy, weirdly, even though Italy's in a weak condition economically with its its bank, and it's kind of had a long depression, long borderline depression. Italy is significantly agricultural and might get by, but all the northern countries that really need the power. I mean, everybody's acting as if even when the Europeans are talking about this crisis, they're acting as if, we just have to get through this winter. No, this is going to continue. There's no solution in 2020.
Far worse next year.
It's going to, you've got to, and what happens when they're going to have a real depression. I mean, they're going to lose at least Germany, and then it's going to sort of ripple through the other economies. They're going to lose so much industry that what happens when they're at 20% unemployment? I mean, what happens to them societally when they hit that point? I mean, I don't know.
No,
I mean,
no,
I think things start breaking.
where-
I think things start breaking, and I don't know what happens when they start breaking, but I think things will start breaking. So
I think that's going to happen soon.
I'm sorry. The goal of
Go ahead.
the Western political elites for Russia was to make the Russian people economically suffer so much that they would rise up and overthrow the government that they overwhelmingly supported.
mhm.
So, in response, all I can say is that I hope that the European people suffer so much from the blowback of their own political elite sanctions that they now rise up and overthrow their governments and put a sane government in its place. I have my skepticism, I have my doubts, but I certainly hope for it.
I do.
But
Yeah.
it will take that suffering
Yeah.
in order to do it. And
Yeah.
because of what you voted into office and intended to make our people suffer, I do not, however, have any sympathy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I think that it was remarkable how the masks fell off and the Russophobia, the deeply ingrained hatred just flowered like Jesus Christ, like some horrible venereal disease. I mean, it was really disgusting.
No, really, really appalling. Well, but there was a second order effect, though. All the praise of the blonde Ukrainians. I mean, that went over real well in the rest of the world. All the how many people just alone in Yemen have died?
Exactly.
Of both cholera and the war, and this was. We could go down the list in terms of other sort of casualties.
Putin has been very smart about playing that up, the neo-colonialism talk.
That in his last speech, that was great.
Yeah.
That was very well done.
Very intentional. Very, very much. That was definitely aimed at South America and Africa and Southeast Asia. That choice of words is not a normal choice of words for Putin.
No.
Speaking continually about colonialism. That was very specific and very intentional.
Yeah, but I also think he was because he was leveraging evidence and sentiment. He was just articulate. He was saying out loud what a lot of people were feeling in those parts of the world.
Because the Africans will suffer from this even more than the Europeans.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're always on the borderline. And however much they tried to present it as about Ukraine, Ukraine is the number 5 supplier of grains to the world. And a lot of that is actually for animal feed. The number 1 supplier of grains to the world is Russia. The number 1 supplier of fertilizer to the world is Russia. And the Africans are painfully aware what the real obstacle and what the real cause of the rise in prices for them that will lead to huge malnutrition through Africa is, which is why no African country is on board with Kiev, and they refuse to participate in the sanctions. And they're also now well aware of how much the EU used that grain deal nonsense to benefit themselves, to get grain and fertilizer for themselves at the further expense of Africa.
Right.
And since we're on, YouTube and not on air, those fucking evil bastards in the EU. Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and the second layer is that it's also the result of the banking sanctions. That I remember when whoever it was, the head of the African Council early on, met with Putin, and he was very clear that one of the big impediments for them buying fertilizer was that they had their banking relations shut down.
Yep.
And when we're completely indifferent to that. We're not willing to make a we weren't willing to make a carve out. How hard would it have been to make a carve out? No, we wouldn't do it.
My credit cards only work, or my debit cards only work in Russia and a handful of other countries. I constantly get people saying, "Hey, Mark, give us a way to give you money, Patreon, all this." I said, there is literally no way you can get me money because we're cut off from you completely.
Yeah. And also, by the way, did you guys hear Ursula von der Idiot give a speech? I think it was yesterday. Basically, she conflated Russia with China. It's like they're picking a fight. It's like suicide. It's like, a gun to her head and like, do what I want or I'll shoot. I mean, what the hell is the matter with her?
Yeah, it's so ideological. It's insane. This generation of European elite is so far removed from Jacques Chirac and Schroeder. They are their own brand of exceptionalism, just as foul and just as messianic as the American neocons and their democratic equivalents are.
Yeah.
I mean, Yves, you saw that speech by von der Leyen, right?
Yeah. No, she's. And remember, I think was it yesterday or the day before that the UK is now escalating against China, as if the UK could really escalate directly against China, but they're all on board. They're all on board.
No, for all the crypto enthusiasts in the chat, crypto markets are also involved in the sanctions against Russia. So no, we can't get crypto either. Sorry.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes.
Jesus. I mean, not even with a VPN?
Yep.
Jesus Christ, man.
I guess somebody would have to mail you a USB. Could that work?
Yeah, and what would I do with that? Burn it? I know. I know. Yeah. No. Yeah.
No, I mean, like,
I'm fine anyway.
To start hearing about some idiocy, PayPal, put out this thing that if you say the wrong thing, if their fact checkers determine that you've said the wrong thing in other social media networks, they're going to fine you $2,500. What the hell, man?
Well, then they backed down. Elon Musk and a former PayPal board member went after them, and they backed down on that. But they can still shut down your account. They still reserve the right to shut down your account. So they stopped their intermediate punishment. They still kept their maximalist punishment mechanism in place.
No, I mean, like they're like they're going insane. They're believing their own bullshit, and it's perfectly fine if you believe some nonsense, but don't inflict it on the rest of us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the desperate. I mean, that's what the sort of the desperation to control the narrative, and that's what. And I hate even using that phrase because it's such a contemporary, icky word. I don't like it. But
the narrative,
the narrative. I know it's everywhere, but
it's true. They're trying to create an alternate reality that there's no relationship to the facts on the ground.
Right.
And the thing is, see, when you construct an alternate reality that does not conform to the truth, to the facts, you're going to wind up inevitably going off a cliff. You're inevitably going to go and wind up, getting hit by a bus. I mean, if I decide, I refuse to believe that there's a bus coming at me, what the hell do you think is going to happen? You know, and that's the thing that's why I object so much to this narrative nonsense, because it's perfectly fine to spin some news so that it doesn't make you look that bad. But when that spin becomes an end in itself and it becomes completely detached from reality, here we're in trouble.
Well,
I used to study philosophy and I specialized in epistemology. And so all of this stuff for me, the narrative and how it's become detached from reality is fascinating stuff, because I'm seeing some philosophical schools of thought being played out in real time. On a global scale. Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of the aspects of it are just really scarily dangerous. When you start believing your own PR to the degree that you're creating new existential threats. I mean, I'm very bothered by this new thing about Putin's going to launch a nuclear war. The various iterations. I mean, and the worst is the worst is, I'm not even sure this is being done at this point with the explicit intent of creating a false flag. It's just Putin says the word nuclear, or even alludes to. I don't even think he said nuclear in the
He
last.
never said
he said
nuclear weapons.
No, he didn't. He just said
Any means at our disposal.
Yeah, any means, and I think he also said something to. Yeah, he said something to the effect of, "Other people have." I'm doing it more crudely, but you've been threatening us with weapons. We have weapons too, and some of them are better than the weapons you have, which was to me meant hypersonic missiles, and we'll use them if we have to. And that's like
he made clear, right, in the paragraph before and the paragraph after that statement, where he said we'll use any systems, any means at our disposal to defend our country and our people. He prefaced that and followed it with noting that he had received threats from political leaders in Western countries to use nuclear weapons against Russian forces in Ukraine. Yeah. And it was blown out of, that was ignored, and everything was blown out of all proportion as part of this. And I do believe it is narrative frame building for a potential down the line, right? It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but you always deal in contingency planning for the possibility of either signaling to Kiev and the neo-Nazis there, like was done with the jihadists and the chemical weapons red lines in Syria, or to shuffle a attack nuke, one of these more usable U.S. weapons. Russia will not use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine unless if NATO was invading Russia to such an extent that Moscow was threatened. That is the only time that Russia would use nuclear weapons.
No, what happens is the Russian leadership is responsible. The Western leadership is completely out to lunch. I mean, irresponsible with children.
Yeah, I follow a number of, my background is in nuclear reactors engineering, but I follow a number of nuclear weapons experts, and they, on my Twitter, they noted some information that was gathered about internal discussions where there was actually a discussion in Iraq. Colin Powell was involved in discussions about the use of nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons there. And they're like, we're probably not going to do it, but run those numbers by me anyway. And let's leave it on, as something that we can draw on if necessary. So if anyone is going to use a nuke in Ukraine on anyone, it's the only country in the world that has used nuclear weapons up to this point, or the nutter in Bankova who has been shelling what was his own nuclear power plant with kamikaze drones and U.S. heavy artillery for the last 2.5 months.
Yeah, even the cokehead of Kiev is actually talking about, or has been talking about, creating a dirty bomb. Because
dirty bomb. That's been, and he's called for a nuclear first strike on Russia.
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I understand that you're desperate, but see, you spew out something like that, and your credibility drops 20%.
Well, it ought to drop. It ought to drop, but it doesn't. The Western press just gives him a free.
Zelensky's approval rating before the intervention started was down to 30%, less than 30%. Yeah. He is not loved in Ukraine. I don't care what propaganda they try to spin it. He was elected on the BS promises to bring peace and to allow the Russian people of East Ukraine, and all of East Ukraine, to speak the Russian language, right? That's what he was elected on. West Ukraine voted for Poroshenko. He was elected, and when he went the opposite route, his support in East Ukraine dropped to nothing, right? He is not loved in Ukraine, and all the U.S. propaganda to the contrary will not change that reality.
Jesus Christ. No, I mean, whoa, Eve dropped out. It must be her internet. Yeah, I mean, look, I to tell you the truth, Mark, I am so frustrated by the fact that the Western leadership is so corrupt and incompetent, and they are all on the same page, and none of them, absolutely none of them, at least on a top tier level, seems to have any notion of reality and what is reasonable or something that there's no responsibility. And
Okay.
and it's so depressing because you can talk to me like, oh, we have to get rid of these leaders. But like you said before, you're just replacing Coke for Pepsi. It's the same
Yeah.
crap.
So, I mean, I studied it at the LSE, right?
Right?
And I was interacting with people from all over the West there, from, Oxford, Cambridge, Americans from across the pond. And I've been debating these Russian experts from the West on media for the last 7 years. They are all ideologues
Yeah.
and exceptionalists themselves to such a degree. There is a feedback loop between the governments and their own experts on Russia and China and probably the own rest of the world, where they're living in this artificial reality of their own propaganda. Their
Yeah.
own experts on Russia and China are giving them such just erroneous, bad presentations of these countries based on what they want them to be rather than what they are, that it is feeding into their own moronic, self-defeating foreign policy decisions.
Yeah, and I don't see a way out. I mean, like for instance, in the UK, they were talking about. I've been hearing some talk that what many conservative backbenchers would like to see is a Jacob Rees-Mogg government, because after all, he was a finance guy and would be able to set right, quote unquote, the economic situation
Please do it.
in the
Do
UK.
it. Do it.
Yeah, what do you think of that possibility? I mean, I think that Rees-Mogg is very humorous. I think he'd be a catastrophe. I mean, he would be like the uber neoliberal who would really torpedo all of the UK. I mean, I think that if he were prime minister, potentially the whole island would actually sink, literally.
As someone who would fondly regard Scottish independence, I say yes. Please give us Mogg.
Oh yeah, they're going to do another Scottish referendum in 2023. I understand.
Yeah.
Jesus
Break
Christ.
it up. Break the British Empire up. Break it up. Elect that SOB. That'll bring it there in a handbasket.
Why do you? I mean, just for the sake of the audience, because I think you and I both agree on Jacob Rees-Mogg, but why do you think that he would be a disaster for the UK?
First of all, I think that every Tory will be a disaster for the UK. Not that the Labour would be that much better, but
Keir Starmer is the next Winston Churchill.
Sure he is. Okay, all right. I mean, there was a chance for a real political change in the UK, and that was Jeremy Corbyn and the entire establishment, from the BBC to the corrupt Labour Party, went out of their way to bring him down. Not because he was a socialist or anything, but because he was a foreign policy heretic against Western hegemony, and that's why. And it is the biggest loss of the United Kingdom, and everything they do stepping away from that is moving a slightly more left Scotland further and further away from London, and eventually it will break. And if there's already enough financial suffering in the country,
my thinking about the two countries, the United States and the UK, is that both Corbyn and Trump were symptoms of the same malady. People generally understand that things are going in the very wrong direction, and they want to change, and they try to use mechanisms, the established political mechanisms, to bring about this very necessary change. And the establishment, the neoliberal, cosmopolitan, global elites, call them what you will, they made sure to torpedo both of them. And so we're never going to have, by way of traditional means, any kind of real political change. I think in Europe, a lot of people talk about an American civil war. I think in Europe, it's much more likely to have a real kind of civil war and complete collapse of the authority. They certainly have more experience with it. I mean, the United States has been a constitutional democracy since 1789, arguably, or 1792, same thing. And so it's much the momentum, or the inertia rather, of the American system makes it less likely of some sort of real revolution. Whereas in Europe, they're used to it. France, it's 2 empires and 3 republics at this point. I forget.
The Europeans are so neutered at this point and so removed from even the idea of violence that they've, you know, outsourced to America. I don't believe that the Europeans are capable of any type of real revolution.
I don't know. I mean, like, well, with my circle of acquaintances or in Europe, there's this weird disconnect. There are some people who are furious and they marched and all the rest of it, and none of these marches make it to the news. None of them. The mainstream news has completely silenced all of the protests. The protests in the Netherlands, in France, in Italy, in Czech Republic, in Germany, in Cologne. There was a big one not too long ago.
Protests don't change. Protests don't change governments.
No, and on the other hand, there's a large swath of Europeans that I'm in touch with who have no idea what's about to hit them. I mean, they really have no clue. They think that things are just marching along and that the leadership will fix it and everything will be hunky-dory. They're completely blind to what's about to hit them. And I've been looking at different numbers and different projections insofar as energy needs of Europe. They simply, nowhere can they find the necessary energy resources to.
No.
Mark?
You've frozen up for me, Gonzalo.
Mark?
Yeah.
Am I back now?
Yeah, you're back now. Kind of. Freezing again.
Hello? Am I? Hello? Hello? Do you guys hear me?
I can occasionally hear you.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me fix this situation, and maybe it's my location. Hang on just a moment. Okay. Do you hear me better now? Hello. Sorry about this. This is technical snafu that I don't have any control over, unfortunately.
Hey, we are bombing your country, the country you're in. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But anyway, the point is, do you guys hear me now? Hit me with a +1 if everything's copacetic.
I can hear you fine now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. It could not be helped. Anyway, the thing is, how can I put this? In 5 years, if you had to guess, how do you see Europe?
Well, significantly less prosperous than they are today. Because there's no going back. I mean, Russia and European relations are not going to go back, even when this conflict reaches its quote end. And again, I don't believe it will ever really end permanently. I think it will be a permanent area of geopolitical and security destabilization. You do not put Ukraine back together again, right? It was finally balanced internally and externally on competing national identity concepts and geopolitically inside and out. And that balance was broken in 2014. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, and you're never going to put it back together again. The only question is where the final partition lines are. I think it'll be the Dnieper.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
So
look, we've been going for 2 hours, and I think that we should wind this down. And Yves is not coming back. Yves, if you hear this later at some point, you know, we're so sorry to have seen you drop out, but we're assuming that it was your internet. This has been a great conversation. Chat, hit me with a +1 for Mark, and a +2 for Yves. If you've been enjoying the show, because I certainly have. This has been a delightful conversation, and we should definitely do it again.
I learned a lot from Yves. That's why I shut up during the whole economics portion, because that's not my specialty, and I learned from hearing from her as well.
She's smart as can be, and her financial blog, The Naked Capitalism, which you can see in the links below, you should follow it every day. I certainly do.
The articles are fantastic, and the daily links are outstanding. They really cover like pretty much a broad spectrum of what's going on in the world. So check it out. It's definitely worth your while on a daily basis. That's what I do at any rate. And Mark can be found at his YouTube channel. You started like posting on it again. Yeah.
I mean, I just started it up a couple months ago. It's a new game for me, so I'm still kind of new at it. So bear with me. But the Real Politique with Mark Sleboda on YouTube, and you can hear a lot more of me on Twitter, where I'm extremely active, and on Telegram as well.
Yeah, because all us Russian bots, all of these Putin stooges, all these Kremlin agents, we all subscribe to Mark's channel on YouTube. So go check it out. It's in the link is in the description below. Mark, stick around for just a few minutes after I wind down the stream just to say a few personal words. And chat, I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will catch you next time. Take it easy.